Well, it has been an interesting week. With the stay-at-home order that was issued this last week, I am sure that you are adjusting, and I hope you're adjusting well. And I'm pleased that we get to spend this time, even though we're scattered around different living rooms and family rooms and dining rooms. I just feel like we are together in this moment today, and I've so been looking forward to the conversation that we get to have today. We've set aside 3 consecutive weekends, the weekends leading up to Easter, to really just kind of tailor make and handcraft some messages for the specific time that we're going through right now. And so this is part 2 of this 3-part run. And the words that I am locking into for this 3-part series are just the words, the land between. Now, I have used these words for years to describe undesired space. When we find ourselves in real estate, often feeling like a desert, there's just space that we don't care to be in. Often it happens when we awaken one morning and it feels like our world has simply been turned upside down. Now, last week in part 1, we talked about thriving in a season of uncertainty. And today, our focus is going to be called goodness in a season of loss. Goodness in a season of loss. And so let me talk for a second just about losing things in this season. Now, having been in ministry for as long as I have, very rarely do I get to experience something that is brand new. But last weekend, I officiated my first ever Facebook wedding. Now, what happened was that it was a living room wedding. It was before our governor put in place the stay-at-home order, but it was after that advisory that encouraged us not to convene groups of over 10 people. And so the bride and the groom, they had been planning this wedding for the better part of a year. And then, the venues canceled, the caterers canceled, and so there we are in a living room with just a handful of family members and a handful of friends. Now, I want to let you know something. It was the perfect wedding for that day. I mean, given the cards that we were dealt, it could not have gone any better, and it was just beautiful. But let's just say this was not the wedding that the bride had anticipated and been hoping for and been planning for and been dreaming about for months. And so there's a sense of loss. You lose something you were hoping for. I can only imagine how many families right about now are waving goodbye to spring break plans that they had. And others canceling vacations that they were really looking forward to. I think of student athletes who live for a spring sport. And now it's becoming very evident that the entire season might be canceled. And my heart goes out to college seniors, those who were about to walk in the graduation ceremony. Family was going to fly in, and they're spending their last weeks of college watching an instructor online, wondering if there will even be a graduation ceremony. Loss is what we're talking about. Those of you who are event planners, and you have spent months of your life preparing for an event that you just had to cancel. And it feels like all of that time and that energy and that preparation just went down the drain. Loss. And yet many of the things that I just mentioned, we can kind of put under the category of disappointment. But there's a different type of loss that has some of you on edge. As a company after company announces layoffs, now we could be talking about job loss, at least temporarily, at least in the short run. And many of you are looking out into the upcoming weeks or couple months, and you're thinking about the relationship between getting laid off for a while and whether you can make it financially. And so we talk in terms of loss of income, job loss, loss of income. And this to you, this is more than just a disappointment. This is causing some sleepless nights for some of you. Some of you are finding yourselves drifting into deep disappointment, discouragement, anxiety, and depression. So listen, let's talk about it. Let's just hit it head on. And rather than taking this topic of losing things and just wishing it away, let's hit it head on and let's have a conversation about goodness in a season of loss. Goodness in a season of loss. Because, my friends, often this land between space, this is often the space where God does some of his finest work and where his goodness prevails. The story that we're going to look at today, it is a woman that will suffer deeply and catastrophically. Her loss will be undescribable. Most of us will never pass through the kind of loss that this woman experienced, and her name is Naomi, and we find her here. Her hometown is where this dot is here. It's the village of Bethlehem, and it's in Israel. And the loss begins with financial loss. There's a famine, there's a drought. And so there's the income loss because crops just aren't growing. But after that loss, there's a loss of community because Naomi and her 3 family members, her husband, we know his name. His name's Elimelech. And she's got 2 adult sons. Their names are Mahlon and Chilion. The family, they up and move. They not only leave the village, they leave the country. They migrate over here on the other side of the Dead Sea to the land of Moab. And so at first there's financial loss, and then second there's loss of community, and then some family members are gonna die, and she will return home 10 years later, having experienced an ocean of grief, feeling like she has lost everything. Even the favor of God, she feels like God has turned on her. But as we watch Naomi, we have not only the opportunity to watch her, we have the opportunity to watch some people around her. And so if we can come back to that title slide, just goodness in a season of loss, Naomi, in her brokenness and in her emptiness, she will experience the presence of God through other people's presence. She will experience the kindness of God through other people's kindness. She will experience the goodness of God through other people's goodness. And so as we embrace this story together and as we walk through this story together, listen, over the next few weeks or next couple months, if you feel body slammed, man, this story's for you. But if you come through this season relatively unscathed and life gets back to normal really fast and it feels like more of a speed bump for you, this story is for you as well. Because our gracious God may be pleased to have you partner with him in showing his goodness to someone around you in their severe extreme loss. As we walk through the story today, we're gonna look at 3 portraits. The portraits of 3 different people, and you already know one of their names, Naomi. As we look at Naomi's portrait, there's just a couple words I want you to lock onto here, and it's just the words emptied out. Naomi, portrait number 1. Naomi feels emptied out when she returns to Bethlehem after being gone for 10 years. Some women in the village look up and they recognize her and they say, Naomi, Naomi, is it you? I want you to see the real and raw rant that pours out of Naomi. Naomi says this, don't call me Naomi, she told them. Call me Mara. Mara means bitter, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. Check this out. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back. I went away full. The Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune on me. My friends, we are looking in on a woman who feels like she has lost everything, and that God has turned on her. Naomi, what is it? I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Naomi feels emptied out. Now, what happened to this woman? What did she experience that would solicit such a strong reaction when she returns home? Is a picture of some of my family taken a couple summers back. My in-laws were in town from California. My kids, grandkids gathered, and so a friend was over, and we snapped this picture in the backyard. But the problem, the problem with any family picture is that it changes so rapidly. I mean, not only did these little kids grow and grow fast, but my son and daughter-in-law, they've had another baby. My daughter and son-in-law, they've had another baby. And so there are new people added to the family picture. As soon as you take a family picture, it seems to change. But sometimes it changes in another direction. It's not simply because people are added, it's because people leave the picture. Either through death or through a divorce, someone evaporates from the family portrait. During the famine, Naomi and her husband Elimelech and her two sons, they are a family portrait of 4 people. But then they become a family portrait of 6 people as the sons, they get married. Mahlon and Chilion. One marries a woman by the name of Orpah. The other marries a woman by the name of Ruth. And so here the family portrait is expanding. It's getting larger. It's moving in the right direction. It's a family portrait of 6. Now you have the promise of grandchildren that may enter the picture as the family portrait expands. But the family portrait of 6 becomes a family portrait of 5. We read in the story in just a sentence that Elimelech, her husband, dies. And we're not told how. We don't know whether it was famine. We don't know if it was starvation. We don't know whether it was a construction accident or a war. But now the husband is gone. A family portrait of 6 becomes a family portrait of 5. And then the family portrait of 5 becomes a family portrait of 3. We learn in a single sentence her sons Mahlon and Chilion, they die. And again, we don't know how. The family portrait you see now is desperate. It's 3 widows. And in the ancient Near East, anybody looking at that picture would just kind of look at it and go, game over. I mean, there are no prospects here. There are no opportunities here. Game over. And then Naomi, the mother-in-law, instructs her 2 daughters-in-law, you girls, you need to go back to your parents. Go back to your mother's houses. Let your parents find you new husbands. I got nothing for you. I'm going back to Israel. And Orpah, she takes off and goes back home. But Ruth, the other daughter-in-law, she just clings to Naomi and gives this famous speech. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Where they plant you in the ground is where they're going to plant me in the ground. And then Naomi comes back to town with her daughter-in-law, Ruth, to Bethlehem. She's been gone for a decade. People see these 2 tired, ragged widows walk into town. Someone recognizes her, Naomi, and she goes, do not call me Naomi. Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, bitter. And she has those words there, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Imagine a bowl here. It's like she's saying, I have been emptied out. And even as we talk about this image and as we focus on Naomi's words, I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Some of you are already connecting with this. Some of you are going like, Jeff, as companies have full-scale layoffs, I got a little bit of savings, not much. There's gonna come a moment in the near future where we're gonna feel emptied out, and I'm not sure I know what we're gonna do. This could financially empty us, and we're really close to the edge. And I also know that there are others who are Jeff, it isn't even this COVID virus thing. It's not the mandatory stay-at-home thing. You'd say, I felt empty before this thing even blew in. Because there was an accident last year and a funeral last year, and it has taken the life out of you. And you say, Jeff, with that loss, we have felt emptied out. I'm sure there are others that just say, no, I got some money. I think we're going to be okay. And I got people, but there is a depression that has blown into my life. And Jeff, I just feel vacuous. I feel numb. I feel emotionally empty. This is our first character. This is our first person. This is our first portrait. It's Naomi. And Naomi feels emptied out. And as the reader concludes chapter 1 of the book of Ruth, the question before the house is this: how might our gracious God be pleased to meet this dear woman who feels that she's been emptied out? How might the goodness of God prevail in her season of loss? And as we shift the camera toward character 2, this isn't just a question we're asking about Naomi, is it? The question we have is this: how might our gracious God be pleased to meet you, to show his goodness to you in your season of loss? And there's a whole different question on the table here. It's how may our gracious God be pleased to use you to show his goodness to someone else who feels emptied out. And so let's leave Naomi and her loss for a moment, and let's look at portrait number 2. Portrait number 2 is the daughter-in-law by the name of Ruth. And the words here, I just want you to lock into the words side by side. In fact, at home, if I get you to play along and just kind of whisper those so you can hear yourself saying them out loud. Okay, side by side, Ruth, side by side. Let's go back to her speech that I mentioned earlier, and let's see what she actually said. She says, Mom, I'm not going anywhere. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people, the Israelite people, the Jewish people, will now be my people. Remember, Ruth's from Moab. And your God, the God of Israel, will be my God. Mom, where you die, that's where I'm going to die, and there I will be buried. It is kind of like where they put you in the ground is where they're going to put me in the ground right next to you. This is powerful, and this is extreme. This is side by side. And by the way, this is so extreme. You can't promise this to 200 people. This is such a love. There's just not enough of you to go around. This is a deep, this is a lasting, this is I am in this with you for the long haul commitment. And I just want to ask you right now, what if in this next season, this season where every day we turn on the news to a different event, this season of home lockdown, what if this next season is a season where you would find yourself, your mission is to make sure that you're side by side committedly to somebody else. I've seen this side by side thing before. I've seen it when there's a situation of terminal cancer, to the point where hospice is called in, and it's very evident to everybody there that this person is not going to recover. and you find yourself in the house, in the home, meeting with the family, and you go, Cheryl, who's Cheryl? It's like, oh, she's a friend of the family. But the next time you're there, Cheryl's there too. It's like she's omnipresent. Cleaning, organizing meals. Sometimes her job is a gatekeeper to keep people away. Because so often, loving people, they just want to show up and encourage, and there's a time when people are drained, and it's just bad timing. And she takes it upon herself to be the air traffic controller. Yeah, leave a card, leave a gift, leave a meal. Now's not a good time to come in. That beautiful blend of deep kindness and assertiveness that need to come together in that moment. Yeah, what are we talking about here? We're talking about someone who says, I'm going to own this for the duration. I will be here side by side because they need somebody who's connected, that owns this as long as it needs to be owned. It's not always extreme. It's something like a cancer situation. You know, we have a couple, Sam and Marcy, who have been involved in our ministry from the early days. A decade and a half back, maybe a bit longer, when they built their house, they added what you call a mother-in-law apartment. Kind of a fully furnished apartment down in the basement with a different entrance. To my knowledge, they never had a mother-in-law that occupied that space. But over the last 25 years, I'm not sure there have been a time when somebody wasn't living with them. And 25 years ago, when Chris and I were between houses with our little kids, we were with them for a spell. Now, again, you can't do this with 200 people unless you have an astronomically large home, but it's a commitment for a period of time. For someone in a transitional space, it's side by side, and it's a powerful, powerful thing. You see, God is going to show his goodness to this woman who has lost so much, but he's going to show his goodness through the goodness of others, like Ruth, who comes along side by side. What if it is your mission in this next season to walk with someone side by side? You're going, Jeff, hey man, we don't have an extra bedroom. You don't need to have an extra bedroom. Sometimes all you need is a cell phone. I've seen situations over the years where there'd be a small group, a group of guys, a group of women, and meeting for a period of time, and then all of a sudden, one of them goes through a life-changing event. A company that they've been building begins to evaporate month by month. The company that it took 18 years to build is disintegrating in 18 months. Or it's a divorce that they didn't see coming. And sometimes the whole small group can speak into that, but often it's one other man or one other woman who will stay in touch by text and by phone to help that person keep their head right and get their heart right. Sometimes to talk them down off a ledge when it just seems like things are going crazy and it feels like they're losing everything. Side by side, side by side, side by side. God shows his kindness through the kindness of Ruth. God shows his presence through the presence of Ruth. God shows his goodness through the goodness of Ruth. What if God would show his presence, his kindness, and goodness through you? Well, now we've got two widows, an older widow, Naomi, another younger widow, Ruth, and they're in Bethlehem. And the question the early reader would be asking would be, how in the world are those women going to eat? How are they going to come up with bread? And the answer to this problem was a system that was called gleaning. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, but let me describe it to you. This is a painting here. The French realist, his name was Jean-Francois Millet. Halfway through the 1800s, like 1850s, he paints this realistic picture of peasant women gleaning in a field. Now, the idea behind gleaning is this isn't your field, but the harvesters have gone through, they've cut the grain, then they've collected the grain, and sometimes they allowed peasants to come through, people who walked a razor's edge when it came to having enough to eat. And they'll let you pick up a stalk of grain here, a stalk of grain here, a stalk of grain here, basically just to scour the field and hopefully come up enough, and then you thresh it, separate the chaff from the grain, take the grain home and have enough for bread for a handful of days. This is what Ruth is about to do when she goes to her mother-in-law, Naomi, for permission. The beginning of Ruth chapter 2, the sequence opens like this. Ruth the Moabite, she's not from Israel, she's a foreigner. And she said to Naomi, her mother-in-law, let me go into the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. And Naomi, the mother-in-law, says, go ahead, my daughter, and then out into the, Ruth leaves the village. Now she goes out into the country, into the fields. We should be getting nervous for her. She's not from there. Ruth speaks with an accent. She's an outsider. And she's got to wander in some guy's field, find the manager and say, if you please, could I just go pick up the scraps, the leftovers that are on the ground? And this is what she does. And then the day comes, the hour comes. The hour comes when the owner of the field shows up and looks over and goes, who's the girl? Because understand something, this is cutting into his bottom line. Who's the girl picking up the scraps in my field? And with this landowner, we happen upon our third character. Guy's name is Boaz. And with this third portrait, Boaz, he just goes above and beyond. Let's go back to Millet's painting, The Gleaners. He comes into the field and he calls his foreman over and he says, who's the girl? And the foreman said, that's the Moabite. I don't know that he even knows her name. That's the Moabite that came home with her mother-in-law, Naomi, to help out Naomi. And she's been here all morning. She showed up early in the morning, and except for a very brief break, she has been working in your field the entire day. The entire day into late morning so far. And Boaz calls her over. And I think if you're Ruth, you're going, okay, what's going to happen now? Probably say, listen, you've done enough in my field. Get out of here. Hit somebody else's field, right? I want you to absorb the speech of Boaz, and I want you to experience his goodness, and I want you to feel the warmth in his voice as he puts Ruth at ease. So Boaz said to Ruth, my daughter, listen to me. Hey, listen to me. It's just my daughter. Isn't that beautiful? He's older than she is, but he's treating her like family. See, that's what hospitality is, isn't it? To treat strangers like family. My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field. Don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me. The dudes, they're in front with threshing sickles, cutting the grain, and there's a group of women gathering the grain. He says, listen, you stick with my girls. You stick with my girls. And then he says this, I've told the men not to lay a hand on you. He told his workers, nobody touches her. He's giving her protection. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. Does anything happen in you as you read this? Listen, this is one of my favorite stories in the Bible. I seem magnetically drawn to preach the story of Ruth, every 5 or 6 years. And every time I get to this moment where Boaz says, you have just come under my protection. And by the way, there's water over there. If you need anything to drink, just go over and drink over there. I'm telling you, there's something about this story that makes me want to be a better man. And literally, Ruth hears this, and she falls on her knees, and she says, why are you treating me with such favor? I am a foreigner. I'm not even one of your own people. And Boaz says, I'm treating you this way because I've heard about you. I heard about the way you left your mom and dad and traveled to Israel in order to take care of your mother-in-law. I've heard about you. And then he begins to call down this blessing. He says, may the Lord, the God of Israel, reward you. May the Lord, the God of Israel, repay you. And he says, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken shelter. And there's such tenderness. And then she goes back to work. And then it's lunchtime, and Boaz's crew, they gather together to have some lunch together. And again, Boaz calls out to Ruth. He says, hey, join our group for lunch. Look at it with me. It's in verse 14. He says, at mealtime, Boaz said to her, come over here, have some bread, and dip it in wine vinegar. No, here's the bread for you. Dip it in the condiments, that we have. And then there's a bonus here. It says, when she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted, and had some left over. How long had it been since she had been full? And so there's this snack food, this roasted grain, these toasty grains, and he gives her a bunch of it, and they ate. Do you know why they ate that? They ate that because they hadn't invented Doritos yet. And so there's this roasted grain she eats, and now she's got leftovers to take home that night. Now, as she's going back to work, Boaz talks to his harvesters, and he says, listen, just drop a few extra pieces accidentally so she'll have more to pick up. My friends, this is over the top. This is what I'm calling above and beyond. Because in the Old Testament law, there was a requirement that if you owned property, you were supposed to pick through the crop once and then leave the leftovers for those who were financially wrecked. But inviting them to lunch, speaking them tenderly, offering them protection, giving them snacks to take home in the evening, this is why the portrait of Boaz is above and beyond. And it's time to ask an important question that we will be asking throughout this entire season that we're in. And the question is this: who are you looking out for? Who are you looking out for? Some of you will have some older adults in your life. You do understand, right, that this COVID virus thing affects people north of 70 in a way that it is less likely to harm those who are in their 30s. It has the ability to be more fatal with those who are elderly. If there is someone in your life where you can just simply pick up the phone or text, hey, we're going out for a grocery run. Do you need anything, so they don't have to expose themselves to a grocery store? I don't have to come in contact with you. I can leave it on your front porch. I can leave it on your front porch. Here's the question: who are you looking out for? Who are you looking out for? I was in contact with a guy last week who has a rental house. It's not his business. It's just totally like on the side, this little rental house. He learned that the people that occupy the rental house, his renters, are now unemployed. And he cut the rent in half for the next 2 months. The explanation was simply this: I don't have to have it right now. You say, well, you don't have to do that. I know, this is above and beyond. In answer to the question, who are you looking out for right now? Part of his answer would be the people that have that rental house, are renters We don't have to have that right now. Again, it's just a question, who are you looking out for? Who are you looking out for? Who are you looking out for? Finances are kind of a personal topic, but from time to time, I've found it necessary to open our financial world a bit, the financial world of Chris and I. I've called us like poster children for Dave Ramsey. Years and years and years and years ago, we established the life habit of spending less than we make, month after month after month after month, year after year after year, which has created a wedge of funds to be able to give away, and it has created a wedge of funds to save. Some 20 years ago, we started building an emergency fund, and the thought occurred to me this past week. Okay, Jeff, what if the emergency fund you've been building isn't for your emergency, but for somebody else's? I went, no. This is the giving fund. This is the savings fund. See, the giving fund is at God's disposal. And then comes the voice of what I knew to be true. Isn't it all at God's disposal? I'm telling you, I had to re-up. I had to pray that 5-word prayer once again that can change the way we hang on to our stuff. That 5-word prayer, all I have is yours. All I have is yours. All I have is yours. Listen, I challenge you to get this settled. Over the next 2, 3, 4 months, you will have dozens of opportunities to be a Boaz. Get it settled now, gracious God. All I have is yours. Don't wait for Washington. The wheels of government, they do tend to move slowly. And from time to time with not perfect efficiency. Don't wait for Washington. You will have the ability to meet real needs in a real world in real time. All I have is yours. All I have is yours. Get this settled and see how God may be pleased to use your life over the upcoming days and over the upcoming weeks. Perhaps over the upcoming months. Listen, concerning generosity, the people of Ada Bible Church, we talk a good game. It is my hope that in the next weeks and months, it is my hope that it is our finest hour in committing our resources to assist the people around us who find themselves in a season of extreme loss. We left Naomi at home. Ruth says, may I go out and glean and pick up grain in whoever's field I find favor. And she takes off out into the country, and it has been a long day. And I think Naomi's worried sick. When Ruth comes home, she's got like 30 pounds of grain. And the leftover toasted grain from lunch that she didn't eat. And Naomi, she sees this and she just begins to throw questions down. It's like she just bubbles over. Naomi, look at her words here. Her mother-in-law asked her, where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. That man was Boaz. Blessed be the man who took notice of you. What I love about this is that Naomi is a character who has been emptied out and who is broken. But listen, it seems to me here that her heart is awakened to God's goodness. It's like her spirit begins to turn. Now listen, she is not all better, but immediately she's beginning to receive the goodness of God through the goodness of Ruth and through the goodness of Boaz. And this is where our story today should end. but I need to keep you for another second because I just need to move along a couple chapters in Ruth and to let you know a couple things. Thing number one, that Boaz and Ruth end up getting married. And then sometime after that, Ruth, she's expecting. She has this little baby, and they name the baby Obed. And so the family picture that we watch go from 4 to 6, and to 5, then to 3, then down to 2. It's expanding again. And there's Naomi, and there's Ruth, and there's Boaz, and then there's little baby Obed. And then Obed grows, and he has a son by the name of Jesse. And you're going, Jeff, thank you so much. Do we really have to know the family tree? Stick with me for a second here. And Jesse grows, and he has several sons. And his youngest son is David, who will be king of Israel. David and Goliath, David, the one who writes Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. He will provide everything that I need. That little baby Obed, that's David's grandpa. Ruth and Boaz are King David's great grandparents. What I'm trying to say is this, that in this loss, in this season of loss, God is moving in and around, and through his fingerprints are all over this story to bring about something they could never imagine. And this is how Ruth and Boaz find themselves in the most boring chapter of the entire Bible, the genealogy of Jesus. Jesus is going to be born. You open Matthew, the Son of God on planet Earth. Our Savior is here, and it begins, and Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob was the father of Perez. And at that point, you go blah, 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 scan, get to the story. But if you pause, this is what you would see. Boaz, the father of Obed, whose mother was Ruth. Obed, the father of Jesse. Jesse, the father of King David, and follow the story far enough, and it would say Jacob, the father of Joseph, whose wife was Mary, who gave birth to Jesus, our Messiah. Through the tragedy of Naomi, God is at work at something intergenerationally to bring deep goodness out of her deep loss. Had a moment to reflect this week on Christ our Lord. Jesus, when he comes, he goes above and beyond. God enters the planet to walk here, coming along side by side, and at the cross, he empties himself out for us. It's goodness in a season of loss. Goodness in a season of loss. Listen to me. If you find yourself emptied out, have hope and anticipate that the goodness of God will meet you in that space. And if you begin to travel through this weird, crazy space that we're in and find yourself pretty much unscathed with little more than a speed bump, do everything that you can to bring the goodness of God to others. See, God showed his goodness through Ruth. God showed his goodness through Boaz. Partner with him in allowing him to pour out his goodness through you. Usually as we end a service, I offer a prayer as you move into your week. A little change up. I've asked Chris to join me, my wife, and she will be praying a prayer of blessing as you move into this next week.
Our precious God in heaven, I just thank you that this is a new day. I thank you that this is a new day that we can move and breathe and have our being. It's a new day that we get to be home with our families and enjoy our children. It's a new day to be in our homes and also to be outside and explore. It's a new day, God, for us to ask for forgiveness, and it's a new day to be forgiven. And I just ask, Lord, that because it is a new day to be with you, that you will help us to rejoice and be glad in it. I also ask you, Lord, for the ability to recommit, to re-up, and to walk side by side with those we love, to walk side by side with a spouse that we're having difficulty with, to be creative and to re-up to being with children and to find creative ways to keep them entertained and contained, and to recommit as teenagers to honoring and respecting our parents. We look forward, God, to what you will do. I ask that marriages will be restored and that families will be renewed and that life will become enjoyable for many people because of their walking side by side and re-upping. I also pray, Lord, that people will recommit to you during this time of confusion, maybe loneliness and fear. Let them to remember that you have promised that you will never, never leave us nor forsake us. And Lord, as we go this week about our business, help us to be looking out for others. Give us wisdom and discernment in how we can go about that. Give us creativity in our minds and our hearts and the ways that we can be looking out for each other. And together, Lord, we will walk this road and we will trust you. We will go above and beyond. We will recommit, and we will walk side by side with each other. And so, Lord, we thank you. We trust you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us this week online. We look forward to next weekend. We'll see you there.